All right, Bruce, so this is how we start this thing, right? Over a drink. We come together, we talk till the drink is gone.
You had me a drink, but anything else after that's gravy, right?
So I like to start off by welcoming you to Over a Drink.
Nice to be here.
Appreciate you giving me a couple minutes of your time.
Dark beer, can't beat it.
Can't beat it, dog, Ben. What is this? This is
You've got a coffee stout, and I've got a milk stout.
you've left the industry, but how long were you a journalist? Oh, you're still a journalist, but how long?
I think it's fair to say probably 40 plus years. I graduated from high school in 1977. Was doing little TV stuff, within my high school then. Went to college and out at Northwestern, the journalism school there, and was doing a lot of college radio. And very early on there was lucky enough to get a job at WGN, first sort of real TV job. And like so many people, you kind of take the job that you get offered. And I was in Abilene, Texas. I was doing sports at the time. You got a real close-up sense of the Friday Night Lights phenomenon, high school football. In fact, the book Friday Night Lights, and I later got a chance to talk to Buzz Bissinger about this, was based on the conference where I was based.
Okay.
Odessa Permian High School, which is the whole sort of focal point of Friday Night Lights. That conference had the two Abilene high schools in it, and you'd go on a Friday night and there'd be thousands of people at these high school football games. I mean, it was just remarkable to see how wrapped up people got in high school football.
That was my first gig was FMZ in Allentown. And now it wasn't as big as, obviously high school football in Texas, but they would do that show called The Big Ticket. And Friday night, I would literally spend the whole night just jumping from game to game to game to game to game. Like I might have to shoot 6 games. And it was like, we don't care whether you get a score.
Right, you're there long enough to get at least one interesting play.
Correct.
And then get out.
Just get in there, get a play, get back, get to the next one. And we would go
And by all means, make sure you get a scorecard of some kind.
Yes,
so we know who the heck did whatever you just saw being done.
So how many stops did you make before you got to Fox, I guess?
Really, only 4 markets.
Okay.
Abilene, Austin, St. Louis, and Philadelphia. So the interesting thing about that is I'm sure you've heard people say, well, in television news, isn't it awful? You have to move all over the place. Yes and no. In television, obviously, the salary structure is pretty much correlated to the size of the market.
The market that you're in.
But you're making the decision more often than not.
One of my biggest regrets is I didn't make more stops outside of Pennsylvania. All my stops have been in Pennsylvania.
Culturally, it's interesting. And you look back on it, it would have given you probably a little bit of extra perspective. I mean, everybody has their own journey and so forth. Getting back to Philadelphia, I quit my job in St. Louis and came here without a job, hoping to latch on with one of the stations. And then within about 3 months or thereabouts, got a job at this brand new operation at Channel 17, which was this hybrid news operation with the Inquirer and the television news folks at Channel 17. And this was a brand new product called Inquirer News Tonight. And I was there for about 2 years. And then jumped over to Fox 29. It was clear to me that the investment that was going to be made in that project was not quite what I had hoped it was going to be.
Which is normally the case.
Right, shockingly, right? Shockingly, the promise was here and the reality was
here. When you're young and you're green and you're hopeful and they say
I wasn't that young or green. I probably should have realized.
You should have seen it coming. But it got you in the door and you were back in the game. So let's move to your time at Fox. And just so... For me, I never took what I did seriously. It never was, for me, like a lot of people I'm learning now, like becoming a journalist was something they wanted to do. It was part of their life plan.
Sure.
Me, it was a job. It was like, I thought I was gonna be a rapper, I'm not gonna be a rapper. Oh, I could do TV anyway? All right, let me do TV. So my first, every story that I did was like a music video in my head. I was shooting a music video and I would edit to the way the reporter would talk.
Right.
It was like the rhythm, and that's how I was doing my job. And I won't say the first time, but working with you actually was my first introduction. Kind of like yo, this dude is like a real journalist. Oh, he takes what he's doing very serious. And it was like an eye opener for me because it was like Now it's like, nah, Mike, this is like a real job. And like the things you put on TV and the things that are said and the way people view this, it affects how people think about things. It affects how people move through life. And one of the things that I admired most about you is that you were doing news that people needed to know, whether they wanted to know it or not.
Most people who know me will tell you I try not to take myself too seriously, but I take what I do very seriously. And, you know, obviously I make mistakes like everybody else on stories, and when I do, you know, I lose sleep over it. I will toss and turn thinking, why the heck did I say that instead of that? I should have known better. I should have, you know, because there's, in this day and age in particular, my view is there's almost no excuse for making a mistake.
Yes.
We all do it, but if I had done this differently, I would have had that better. If I had, the context of this would have been more clear to people. I phrased it this way, and I can defend phrasing it that way, but that really wasn't the best way to phrase it. If I had said this, that would have been clearer, and these people wouldn't have been misunderstanding what I said, because if a certain number of people misunderstood what you said, then it's obviously something that I did
Correct.
wrong, and not just, oh, they're just dumb, they didn't know. You know, so I take that very seriously, and especially the writing aspect of it. The biggest joy that I got in 40 years or so of reporting, frankly, was to be able to take that, what I always call like this puzzle, and there's 9,000 pieces to the puzzle, and it's all in a big bucket, and you spill it out on the floor, and there's 5,000 different ways. Unlike a normal puzzle, there's 5,000 different ways to put that puzzle together. There's so many different ways to tell the story of that murder that happened on that street in that neighborhood in Philadelphia. And when we would get there, I mean, obviously part of it is, as you well know, it is incredible time pressure. And you're getting there and you've got maybe 2 or 3 hours maximum to do your reporting. And then you've got to log the video you shot and the interviews you did. And then you've got to edit it and get it back to the station and so forth. So you only have several hours maximum to do it. But I'd always like to spend the first few minutes at least just sort of wandering around the neighborhood. All right, who's here? Who can I build this story around? And I will tell you, like on some of these stories and these awful murders that we've all covered far too many of over the years, often I would find a little old lady who's sitting on her porch. And of course the porch, like so many in Philadelphia, is a form of a fancy cage, really.
Yeah.
It's got the wrought iron and it's fancy work, but it's basically
It's just a cage.
It's a cage because I don't want people getting in here into my house.
Correct.
And you talk to these folks, and they're some of the nicest people in the world. Their friendliness toward me, a stranger, was often just remarkable to me. I would often say to myself, boy, if somebody came to my house like I'm coming to their house, I'm not sure I'd even open the door. They're inviting me in, you know, whether I have to use their bathroom or whatever.
Bathroom, offer you something to drink, all the time.
But the story, more often than not, which I thought resonated more with people than just the who, what, where, when of this day's murder, and sadly there are so many that for many viewers they kind of run together, but this woman's been living in this neighborhood for 50 years, and she remembers the time when she could sit out on her porch at night, and when she didn't have to have the wrought iron cage basically on her porch. And so I start the piece maybe and end the piece with her perspective.
Yes.
She's sitting down, she's 3 doors down from where the murder happened, and we'll get to the details of the murder, but to me, the more interesting story is that all over town there are these people who have lived in these neighborhoods for years, and now, sadly, they're a prisoner in their own home because of what's going on around them. And that to me becomes, I call it kind of completing the circle. You start the piece with that woman, you get to the meat of the sandwich, if you will, is the who, what, where of that murder that happened down the street. And at the end, you bring it around to her and whatever her thoughts are on, this is the reality now in my neighborhood.
That for me was the beauty of what you did with this craft. You know what I mean? I'm like, yo, this dude has found a way to take, you said, the run-of-the-mill homicide and turn it into something that...
Isn't that sad that it's a run-of-the-mill?
I know, and
I know exactly what you mean by the
but
term.
that's what it is to us, because we see him.
When something happens 350 times a year in the city or in the suburbs, it's awful.
It is awful, but you found a way to make me as a viewer care about this story again.
All too often, I think, in local TV news, we do these stories from the standpoint of, well, and if I hear this expression once, I've heard 1,000 times, police need your help.
Yeah.
Well, okay, but the likelihood that any individual viewer knows that guy who just robbed the bank or just shot somebody, or has some information to give to police about a specific murder, if they do, by all means, report it to the
Correct.
police and be as cooperative as you feel like you can. But for the other 99% of the audience, this is a story that they don't know anything about. They didn't know the shooter. They didn't know the victim. So give them some kind of information
Why
that
they
gives
should
them a
care.
sense of
Yeah.
why they should care about it. Right.
You made me care about politicians. You know what I mean? You made me care about politics. I met future presidents with you. You know what I mean? George Bush, I don't even know if you remember that. Like, we interviewed George Bush together. Next thing I know, this guy's the president.
Was that at Ben Salem High School?
It was at a high school. I don't remember what high school.
Do you remember what happened? That he came on the stage. I'll never forget this. He came on the stage, and one of the high school kids, it looked like it was one of the football players, but it was a local high school. It may have been Ben Salem, but don't quote me.
Yeah, I
even
know
though
it was a
I'm
high
right.
school, though.
And one of the guys yelled out an obscenity as he came on to the stage. And I'll never forget the classic sort of gym teacher or football coach looking guy went over to the group of people where he knew the sound had come from, and he goes, the kid's probably never been seen or heard from again. Right. He was taken to some site and waterboarded after that or whatever. But and I'll never forget when I look back at the video, Mr. Bush did one of these kind of like if there'd been a sound effect, it would have gone like, because he clearly heard it.
He heard it, yeah.
Yeah.
Of your 40 years of doing this, man, what story, is there any story or a number of stories that stand out the most to you?
7 national political conventions, pretty much all the big trials, whether it's Tom Capano or Jerry Sandusky or Bill Cosby 1 and 2. All of those were fascinating to be part of. And Sports Stories, being one of the hosts for our Phillies World Series coverage and the parade in 2008. Some years back, a woman reached out to me and said, my son, Michael, has been accused of attempted murder for a shooting at a rec center in Philadelphia near Temple University. And my son's didn't do this. This is a bad rap. And you hear that kind of thing all the time. So I said, well, let me go over and look at the situation. And they had a variety of challenges they were trying to overcome within that family. But at any rate, I listened to the story and I thought, wow, this does seem like this is a really weak case. Mm-hmm. In particular, real quickly, a key witness who worked at the rec center was there and knew that this young man, Michael, had not fired a gun, didn't have a gun. Completely bogus charges. But that key witness had never been interviewed by the district attorney's office, oddly enough. And the defense attorney at the time hadn't made anything of that. So I ran into Jack McMahon one time, and I thought to myself, this is not my real place to be soliciting a new defense attorney for this young man. Excuse me. Anyway, long story short, I explained the story to him, and I basically said, this kid could sure use some help, because I think this is I don't normally get involved like this, but this is a bad rap on this kid. He took what I was trying to, he took the message, long story short, got involved in the case, asked the right questions, and at the next hearing, blew the prosecution case away, and the judge shut it down at that point. As you know, you go to a preliminary hearing, the standard for proof is quite low, and that's all part of the system, that's fine. But basically, at that point, in a preliminary hearing, 99 cases out of 100, you're held for trial.
Correct.
All that you have to really do as a prosecutor is prove a crime was committed, and it's more likely than not that Mike Greenwich did it.
Correct.
Mike Greenwich is being held for trial. This was shut down at that point in the case, and that was the end of the case. And so, as he walked out of the courtroom that day, I thought, Michael Horton was his name, I thought to myself, I feel like I did something today.
Yeah.
And I will always remember Jack McMahon for getting involved in the case as he did, and doing right by this young man.
Dude, you might have saved this kid's life, man.
I don't know, I don't know what happened to Michael years after that, because this case was a fair number of years ago. All I know is at the time we were able to kind of right what I thought was a pretty clear wrong And it's those kind of situations that make you glad you got involved.
Facts.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm gonna end this in a second here, Bruce, but I'm just gonna share my favorite Bruce fun fact. Is when I found out you were a DJ in college, dude. And
Yeah.
when I and coming speaking in full circle, going from thinking, damn, this guy is very serious. He's gonna be like super corny and he's gonna be on my top, making me overwork out here in these streets. I would be so entertained when I would sit in the car with you and I like throw on DAS or something like that and watch you tap your fingers to the music or hum along or tap your toes. And I'm like, dude, this guy is way hipper than I gave him credit for. Shame on you, Mike.
Massive street cred, right? As I like to say.
Hey, listen, man, I appreciate you letting me rap with you for
My
a minute,
pleasure.
Bruce.
It was a real
It was
pleasure.
a pleasure working
Yeah.
with you, man. It's a pleasure knowing you, man.
Same here. Ooh, I love that dark beer.
Over drinks, Bruce. That's how we do it, bro. That's it. Thank you,
Perfect.
man.
Oh, my pleasure, man.